This is episode 135 of the Mindset Game podcast, and I'm your host, James Roberts. I'm a two-time Paralympian, online training and nutrition coach, and owner of James Robert Fitness. Why not check out some of my free content at fitamputee.co.uk/free-resources. Each week on the Mindset Game podcast, we bring you an inspirational athlete, message, or expert talking about human optimization to teach you how to change the perception of your mindset and become 1% better. Make sure to share this with your friends on your Instagram story, on Twitter, or on Facebook. They can find this episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere that they listen to podcasts by searching for Mindset Game Podcast. And on today's show, I've got Steele. He's a freelance broadcaster, best-selling author of the book Nerves of Steel, an after-dinner speaker, and a former SEN teacher.
As an athlete, you can't afford to give them the respect that they deserve as a legend on the field because you're mentally one step behind them then, I suppose. So you, on the contrary, you have to go on the field with the attitude, I don't care who you are, I don't care if you're Ray Gravell or you're JPR Williams or whatever, you're not as good as me type of thing. You've got to believe that.
Take a screenshot and tag at James O. Roberts 11. Without further ado, let's get into today's show. So welcome onto the show, Phil.
Thank you very much, James. Nice to be with you.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. So before we go into today's show and topic more specifically, Phil, for the listeners that aren't predominantly in Wales, can you give a kind of a brief description of yourself?
Yeah, I'm a Cardiff boy. I'm 57 years of age, born in Ely, and I always say I was born in the rough part of Ely. It's called Ely. A big council estate on the western side of the city, and I've been involved in rugby since the age of 8, playing in primary school. I trained as a teacher in a place called Cardiff Metropolitan University, which used to be called Cardiff College of Education, which is where Gareth Edwards and J.J. Williams, Alan Martin, Lynn Davis, and lots of great Welsh sportsmen went. Great college for turning out PE teachers. I was a teacher for 25 years, 10 years of them teaching physical education, and then 15 years teaching special needs pupils, slow learning pupils in a comprehensive school in the Rugby Valley, which is one of the South Wales old coal valleys of South Wales here, for those not familiar, which I did for 25 years. And then I started working for the BBC in 1995 after I finished playing rugby, and kept the two careers going, and gave up teaching 10 years ago. So I'm now a full-time freelance broadcaster, although I've been working for the BBC since 1995. I also do a lot of after-dinner speaking. I do about 65 after-dinner speeches a year. It takes me all around the country and abroad as well, hosting of events and that sort of thing. And as a former player, I was a player with the Morgan Wanderers and Newport in the 1980s. I got in the Wales B squad in 1983, and that was about as far as I got. And I was a fullback. I was a pacifist, non-tackling fullback, as I used to describe myself. So here I am at the age of 57, talking to you.
And obviously you posted, it would have been about a few weeks ago now, getting the chance to play against Ray Gravell. So talk to me about that experience, to be able to be on the same field as what you and I would call a Welsh legend.
Yeah, well, that's a lovely thing about working in the industry that I work in, is the chance I get to mix and meet with Welsh legends. I'm on first name terms with Sir Gareth Edwards. I watched two of the Lions tests last year in Sir Gareth's house for Facebook Live for the BBC Sport Wales website. Barry John wrote a nice testimonial for my book. It's amazing to be able to work in this industry with players who I now call sort of friends almost, who were like my heroes when I was a kid. The lovely thing about when I'm looking back playing was when you come through as a player, it's always lovely when you play against or you play with people who were your heroes when you were a bit younger. And Gravell, of course, because Grav, as he was known, played in the Great Welsh side of the 70s, and I played against him 3 times at the end of his career, beginning of my career. When you're on the field with him, it's the same as if you're doing an interview. If you have to interview Dan Carter in my job now, I have to interview Richie McCaw or any sort of like big name. You don't think of them at the time as being stars. Ray was just a centre that you had to stop if he came through, you know, and you don't want him to do well because he's in the opposition type of thing. And it's the same when you're interviewing, say, Richie McCaw or one of the stars of rugby. They're just people you have to interview very quickly for a minute or whatever. You ask the correct questions. You don't think of them at the time as being legends. And it's only afterwards you think, good Lord, last week I interviewed Richie McCaw. You know, it's sort of a thing you look back on. So to be on the field as the same field as, say, a legend like Gravell, it's something you look back like all these years later and think, well, I played against that legend, you know. It's a kind of funny, a strange experience in a way. You don't appreciate it at the time.
But do you think that comes down to an athlete's kind of mindset? We kind of don't appreciate the moment till we look back upon it.
I think that is, and of course, as an athlete or as a rugby player, and you would know a great deal more than me about sort of high performance probably. As an athlete, you can't afford to give them the respect that they deserve as a legend on the field because you're mentally one step behind them then, I suppose. So you, on the contrary, you have to go on the field with the attitude, I don't care who you are, I don't care if you're Ray Gravell or you're JPR Williams or whatever, you're not as good as me type of thing. You've got to believe that.
But this is probably a good poignant question now, Phil. In that kind of mentality now, it's kind of comparing apple and oranges a little bit, looking at professional rugby compared to, say, before 1997, would you say back then there was no difference between the players because obviously you guys had a day-to-day job as well as the rugby, whereas now this is their sole career? How do you think the mindset from that perspective has shifted?
Oh, well, when we played, we were amateurs. I used to do a full day in school and then play on a Wednesday night in front of a crowd of 7,000 or 8,000 for Newport against Pontypool or against the Barbarians or against Cardiff. And the fact that you had a job next day, if you had a good game or you had a poor game, you couldn't dwell on it. You know, there was no such thing as analysis and looking over your performance. The next time you learn about your performance would be perhaps the next time in training, where the coach would give you a telling off if he thought you'd made a mistake. But it was very so. So in terms of like being able to analyse your performance or to have any sort of psychological advice with regards to performance, you couldn't, because you just went about your day job the next day. Now, of course, these players, it's their job, and every little move is analysed, isn't it? You know, when we travel back on a plane the next morning with the professional teams, if we've been covering a match away in Ireland or in Glasgow, say with the Cardiff Blues, all the players will be on their laptops in the airport first thing in the morning. The analysts will have stayed up all night preparing the footage for the players to see, you know. So it's a completely different mindset now, you know. One of the things I did enjoy about the amateur era was the fact that it wasn't to, even though we all played to win and nobody trained harder than me, and being a PE teacher, it was almost a professional commitment that I put in, because I would train in my lunchtime, you know, train after school and whatever. So I was as fit as it was possible to be. But the fact that you had a day job meant that the game never really took over your life to the degree that it does now.
But is that to a detriment to the player, or could you see, well, there is some positives to it?
Yeah, well, I used to think that for me personally, I mean, I was always a confidence player, you know. And if you told me psychology-wise, if you told me I was a good fullback, I'd be a bloody good fullback for you on a Saturday. If you told me I was, playing for my place, I'd go into my shell and I might as well not have been on the field, you know. So the fact that we didn't have that sort of professional analyst was a good thing for me, really, because I wouldn't be able to dwell on the fact that I'd done something wrong, you know, or let negative thoughts, and because it's been well documented, you know, that I have suffered with mental illness, which I did when I was playing as well. the fact that I didn't have all that professional analysis and all that coaching that they get now and the psychology that they get now was probably a good thing for me. Not to my detriment. It was a good thing.
But talking about this confidence issue now, Phil, do you think in the modern era, and probably more so in Wales, it's sometimes overkill? We're doing analysis for the sake of it, and in terms of, well, I know that you work for the media, so it's probably kind of a controversial question, but sometimes do they not think of the players' mental state and well-being for some of the criticism they give? And I can understand from my athletic background, some of it's rightly so, and a player will hold their hands up and say, yes, I have made a mistake. But does it kind of go too far in certain circumstances?
Well, to compare again, going back to my era, I never got paid a penny for playing for Newport or Glamorgan Wanderers. It was just you'd get petrol money to travel from where I lived in Taftswell near Cardiff to go to Newport. So I never got paid a penny. So if all of a sudden you're training your heart out and working really hard for no reward at all, just for the honour of playing in that Newport jersey or that Cardiff jersey or the Llanelli jersey, and all of a sudden you read in the Sunday paper what was Steele doing there. He had an awful game. He was pathetic. That used to be a bit hard to take because sometimes you look at that and you think, well, A, has this bloke played any rugby at all? Does he know what it's like to be on the field? And B, well, here's me. I'm just doing this supposedly for the love of the game, and I'm having to put up with somebody putting in some quite destructive criticism when I'm just doing it for love anyway. Criticism today of players, I think if you're getting paid exceptional amounts of money, which not all players get, but a lot of players do, certainly much more than I ever saw out of the game, and that's not a moan or anything. That's just the way it is. I think you can expect to be criticised in the same way that if a doctor does a bad consultation, he can expect to be criticised, or a teacher gives a poor lesson, they can expect to be criticised.
I think that's a good answer, Phil. And now we kind of move on to your book. What was kind of the initial thoughts to make it obviously a publication? What were kind of your thoughts behind let's publish this book and get it out into the greater community?
Yeah, very good question, that is. I've been asked that quite a bit. Just to give the background, the book is called Nerves of Steel, and I suffered 3 major bouts of depression in my life. The first one was after a rugby injury when I was 23, back in 1984, after a rugby injury playing for Newport. I'd been in one of the Wales squads and had a knee injury, and I had a bout of depression then, and it was sort of linked, doctors told me, to sort of being out of the game for a long time and almost like a bereavement. You've lost your chance of becoming an international, and your career is sort of taken away. So I've had 3 major bouts of depression, but also bouts of chronic anxiety, which was probably even worse than depression. I'm talking about anxiety, and I'm talking about having panic attacks in a changing room before going out to play for Newport against Vale, of claustrophobia because there was no windows in the changing room. I'm talking about panic attacks. Having the act of kicking a goal, because I was a bit of a goal kicker, having a bad anxiety just all the time, really, teaching, just in life generally. And of course, that was the 1980s when you couldn't, as a rugby player, you certainly couldn't talk about it, So anyway, going back to your question, the reason why I wrote the book is because most people who see me, who are probably listening to this now, who see me on the television on Scrum 5 for the BBC on a Friday night, or hear me speaking at dinners, they probably think that I'm the most confident and the most erudite and the most sorted man in the world. And what they see when they see me on television is the real me. I do love life, and I am a humorous person, and I love company, and I love having a laugh and fun. But it doesn't reflect what has been going on underneath for 25, 30 years. So the whole the book is about the whole conundrum of me, because when I said to people, when I first started to admit that I suffered with depression, everybody would say to me, Steele, you of all people, I can't believe you must be joking. You can't be depressed. A person like you're always full of life. You're always full of fun, you know. And that was the reason I sort of brought out the book, to show that mental illness, depression, anxiety, if it can happen to Steele, who seems to have life sorted, it can happen to anybody, you know. One of the points I make in the book, James, is that I could pick you an ex-Welsh international team of players who've suffered with depression. It would be captained by Delmy Thomas, the great Llanelli second row, 3 times a Lions tourist, who captained Llanelli when they beat the All Blacks in the famous game of '72. Delmy could captain the side. He's well documented as suffering with it. Clive Norling, the great referee, could referee the match. He's well documented as being suffering from it. You've got Tom James now, the Cardiff Blues player, has recently come out. The Cardiff Blues and Wales Wing said he's suffered with it. So the whole reason of writing the book was to just get it out there that look, here I am. I'm Phil Steele, and you think I've got life sorted, and I'm this hail fellow, well met, always full of fun, and that is me. That is the true Phil Steele. But there is another side as well, you know. And if it can happen to Steele, why can't it happen to me? The 2 worst things that you get when you have a bout of depression, the 2 worst feelings are, first of all, you think you're never going to get better. And secondly, you think you're the only person who's ever had it. It's a very isolating disease, you know, illness. And so to answer to those 2 things, well, if Phil Steele can have it, why can't I? And Phil Steele is better. And he's recovered. So there's no reason why I can't either. You know, that's the whole premise of the book.
And do you think, from a personal opinion now, Phil, it generally is the ones that suffer with depression and anxiety are sometimes the ones that people are presumptuous of being very confident in themselves?
I think that's probably a bit of a generalization, but a lot of truth in it. Yeah. Performers, it's very common in performers. It's very common in comedians. It's very common in the acting profession. I think there is definitely something in that you can. Funny enough, when I had my second bad bout in the early '90s, I can remember speaking at a dinner in front of about 300 people and being virtually carried out shoulder high, standing ovation, went down great, you know, and having to stop in a phone box on the way home, no mobiles then, to phone my wife just in tears saying, I don't know what I'm going to do, love. And I was it was only 20 minutes from home. I had to stop in a phone box, and I was just overcome with this awful feeling of anxiety and just the need to sob, you know. And and when I was bad in particularly that second bout, the one thing I could do was speak at dinners. You know, I could do that without any problem at all. And it was, so I suppose it's like an act, isn't it? You know, and that was able to take me out of myself just for that half hour or that 40 minutes, and being on that stage and being like the Phil Steele, the performer, rather than just Phil. That was a help. But but to go back to your original question, I think it is probably quite common in performers, sports people too, because you know we're performers, aren't we? Sports people are performers.
Well, as we're discussing this, I've been struggling with the bouts of anxiety, gosh, for the last 2-3 months. I think maybe because of my background with doing sports science at university, I can kind of look at it in a different light. I can kind of give myself a little bit of prognosis. Yes, I'm getting help as well on the side, but I can kind of answer, well, I should be looking at it in this kind of light because that's how I was taught at university. If you don't believe there's something to be true, you need to challenge it. Whereas, well, you can attest to, with depression and anxiety, you start to believe what you're thinking.
Yeah, that's very true. What it is, it's a distortion of the mind, isn't it? I mean, when I had my first bout, I was suicidal. I was 23. I just started teaching. I was engaged to be married to Liz. And I didn't know what it was. I thought I was in the want of I wouldn't use this terminology these days, but in those days I thought I was going around the twist, as you said. You know, I was psychotic. I wasn't psychotic in terms of hallucinations or voices, but I was I was psychotic in terms of thought patterns, really distorted patterns of thinking, and of course I heard of depression, but I always thought it was just somebody feeling a bit down in the dumps, for some reason. But and over the years, the longer I've suffered with it, the more I read about it, the more I was treated for it, whatever, you come to gain more wisdom about the condition. That's the thing. And now I sort of look at it as just to think that it's a part of me, just like the fact that I'm a bit asthmatic. I'm an exercise-induced asthmatic, and I have to take a pump when I run in the gym. So I still take a small dose of antidepressant daily just to keep me. It's just part of me, And some people are born with diabetes type 1. Some people are born with spina bifida. Some people are born with other issues. I just happen to be susceptible to depression and anxiety.
And this is probably a poignant question, Phil. You talked about, obviously, your anxiety for goal kicking, and most people would probably associate, obviously, the changing room with claustrophobia and things like that, the fear of being in a confined space. But could you put it down to the exact anxiety for goal kicking? Was it the actual fear of missing it, or? Well,
I'll tell you. This is how I describe it in the book. If I was I wasn't always the designated goal kicker, but if I was the designated goal kicker for the day, and I'd be at fullback watching the play going down in the opposition 22, and I could feel myself getting tense and anxious, and my stomach turning over, and then I would dread the referee blowing for a penalty to Newport. And if his arm went out like that, they didn't used to do the playing advantage, but if his arm went up for a penalty to Newport, it would be like the judge donning the old black cap to pronounce the death sentence. And the captain would say to me, "Steele, do you fancy it?" And of course I'd come up, "Yes, of course, skipper." And I'd come up. And in those days, there were no tees. You used to dig like 4 holes and make your own sort of tee out of the mud, And as I'd be putting the ball down, I'd be literally watching the posts sort of going narrower and narrower in front of my face. And then I can remember I'd utter a little prayer to myself as I put the ball down. I'd walk back and I'd utter a little prayer to myself. "Please, God, when I make connection with this ball now, will you let it go long and let it go high? I know it's not going to go over, but will you let it go long and let it go high? Because if people are watching from the sideline, at least they'll say, 'Good effort, Steele.'" And this was the worst of it, James. If it did go over, if the ball did go over, instead of being able to tell myself these voices, instead of being able to tell myself, "Well done, Steele, you've got your kicking boots on today. Good, you're off now. Kick the next one as well. Good day today." The little thoughts in my head would be saying, "You lucky bugger, you're not going to get the next one. You've had it, mate. And that was what it would be like, And of course, then is the fear of the fear. You're in the change room thinking, "Oh God, when's that first goal kick going to come to me today?" It's just the fear of knowing you're going to be anxious, which is a bit of a vicious cycle.
Well, it's and you talk about in terms of when would the points differentiation would have come in? Obviously, going from, see if I get this right, from 2 points for a penalty and conversion to what it is now.
Yeah, always 3 points for a penalty. Always 3 points for a penalty in my year, which it still is now, and 2 points for conversion. It was 4 points for a try when I played. Getting 5 points in the mid-90s, and I'd retired by then. So but it wasn't so much the fact of if I'm going to be disappointed now because if I don't get those 3 points, the team could lose. It wasn't that. If it was that, I could sort of identify with that, because that's only showing you're a team player, isn't it? It was the fear of being exposed, just me, with all these 5,000 eyes in the ground on just me, and I'm gonna mess up, and I'm gonna make a fool of myself, and I'm gonna look like Mickey Mouse. That was the fear. I think that was the fear of being, sort of ridiculed. Because one of the things that depression does for you is it just drains you changes you with confidence, and your self-esteem and everything is just rock bottom, which is why when I used to step up to take a kick, I knew I wasn't going to get it. Even if I did get it, I knew I wasn't going to get it. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm assuming every kicker, listening to this or who has played the game, can to some degree echo that sentiment.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But of course, the difference between say somebody like me of my personality and say somebody like Jonathan Davis, the great Jonathan Davis. If Jonathan ever missed a kick, he would probably say and believe it, or somebody moved the posts, or the wind must have gone. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't his fault. That confidence, that rock solid confidence, would never ever be. Would always be there for people like him or Barry John or any of the great sort of kickers. Neil Jenkins. I remember when Neil Jenkins was on the scene when the game went professional and the game was just starting to have sports medicine in it. And I remember a very interesting interview with Neil that he gave. It was a fantastic chap, and he said that he was working with a psychologist that taught him that when he looks at the ball, to imagine that all his negative thoughts are draining out of his mind and they're going to be put in a black box, which is on the side of the pitch. And that famous sort of long preparation that Neil did for his kicking, when he got the sand, he brought the sand on and he'd study the post and look at the ball and study. But that was all this mental process of unlocking these sort of any negative thoughts, putting them into the box over the touchline. Of course, we were the amateur era. We didn't have anything like that. If you had a bad day with a kick in, or it would be never mind, Steele, get 6 pints down. You'll soon forget about that. On to next week. That was the psychological analysis we had. Really, get 6 pints down here.
But it's a definite culture shift between, say, what is the modern game now and before the professional era. It's definitely completely alien to each other. Well, they still drink nowadays. After not so much, but it's still a culture in rugby.
Yeah. And now, if I was playing now, I would have had a psychologist to say, right, why are you feeling like this? And taking me through psychological thought processes to get rid of the negative thoughts. I'd have had all that now. I'd have all that backup. But we were sort of just left to your own devices, and you just sort of we didn't have kicking coaches, for example. So if you were just striking the ball wrong, for example, you just have to go. I'd have to go out on the pitch in school next day after lunchtime and just kick a few balls to try and get it right. But you just have to find your own method and work as best you can, sort it out yourself, really.
Phil, isn't that difficult? Because obviously the pitches back in the 80s and maybe to some degree the 90s are nowhere near up to the standard of what they are today.
No, that's correct. You didn't have kicking tees and you didn't have sand and all that sort of stuff. I remember going on the pitch the one time, practicing with the top off, because it was summer and you couldn't dig anyone who was a goal kicker in those days. Remember, in the summer, you could, if the pitches were a bit hard, early season or end of the season or in pre-season, and you couldn't dig up your tump to put the ball on. I remember going out with the top of an aerosol can, turn it upside down and sticking the ball in the hole of the aerosol can, the top of the aerosol can, to lift the ball off the ground. That was just a method I sort of tried. But as you say, you were just left to your own devices, really. There's no such thing as a kicking coach or certainly not a psychologist,
But I would
think of some boys in my era who could have done with a psychiatrist.
But I would say to some degree, your era are probably, in my opinion, better to deal with mental fortitude and things like that, because you had to do it yourself. You had nobody to rely on, and which I would say I've put myself in that bracket as well. We probably don't have to make those decisions ourselves, and my family said this to me quite recently. When you're in sport, you went to whoever it may be, doctor, physio, you name it. This is my problem. What do I need to do? And they kind of come up with the solution. Whereas your generation, you've got to come up with the solution, be it either go one way in the fork of the road, find a solution, or come up with a problem to come over those circumstances. So I say to some degree, you'll probably mentally have a stronger willpower than I would say probably athletes of my generation.
Yeah, that's possibly a good point. I haven't thought about it like that really. And at the time, you don't realise you're probably building your resilience and your mental fortitude and your intestinal fortitude without even thinking about it. But that's probably a good point. And things like fitness, you have to train on your own. If you wanted to play at the highest level of club rugby, and say as a fullback you were lacking a bit of speed off the mark, the only way you could do it was to get out on your own and train on your own. Now as a professional, you'd have a sprint coach and you'd be timed every you'd have your stats for your 30-meter sprint and your 50-meter sprint, and everything would be done scientifically. But if you thought you were a couple of yards off the pace and to get back in the team after an injury, you needed to sharpen up, you just had to get out there and sprint when you could.
And this probably next question for you, Phil, is probably very controversial within Welsh sport at this moment. Do you think, obviously, regional rugby had to come in when it did, but do you think it's possibly killed the club game now? And obviously, some of the clubs are going by the wayside as we speak.
Yeah, this is the toxic question that's been on people's minds for since regional rugby came in 2003. This is just my opinion. This is not necessarily how it is. This is and this opinion, my opinion, is worth no more than Joe Bloggs' opinion, or any rugby lover in Wales or around the world. What people have to remember, in 2003, the Welsh Rugby Union were pretty strapped for cash. They had that massive stadium debt. And there was no way that, what did we have then? We had the first division of, or the Premier Division I think it was 12 teams or 16 teams maybe. I first started broadcasting in 95, and I used to go to Abertillery most of the weeks in Dunvant. So there we are. I think it was a 16-team league, if I remember. And the game went professional. There was no way that 16 teams could have been funded. Certainly not funded centrally by the Welsh Rugby Union. The benefactors helped. So you had Peter Thomas at Cardiff and so on, Tony Brown at Newport. And then when David Moffat came in and took over, I think what he found was that the fact that the game was bankrupt, and there was only sufficient money in Wales to sustain 5, as he had it, 5 professional teams. Now it's 4. What I think probably they didn't get right then. Hindsight is such a wonderful thing. 2020 vision hindsight is such a wonderful thing. What they probably didn't get right then was the way that the game was carved up. And I would have, looking back now, I think I would have gone still with the clubs, because those brands of Cardiff Rugby Club, the most famous rugby club in the world probably, but certainly one of the most famous names in the world. Cardiff Arms Park, probably one of the most famous sports grounds in the world, never mind just rugby, I think I would have gone with 5 clubs, because you've got the tradition, you had the following, you had the brand of the clubs that were known in not only throughout the UK and Europe but worldwide. But if you remember at the time, and probably those 5 clubs, most people would have said, probably, if you look at the traditions, most people would have said Cardiff, Newport, Swansea, Llanelli, and one other. I've got to be very careful what I say now, because I can feel people, for friends of mine, what are you on about, Steele? But those 4 certainly were always known as the big 4. They were the ones that used to play the touring sides. They were the ones that used to get the big crowds. And they were the ones that were probably the most well-known. And also the big population centres, Newport, Cardiff, and Swansea. Then the 5th would probably have been somebody like Pontypridd, who were quite strong at the time. Neath were quite strong. You had Bridgend, Aberavon, Ebervale. So how you would have got that through politically, Welsh rugby being what it is, with the tribal nature, I'm not sure. And I wouldn't like to have been the bloke who had to try it. So I think what they came up with in the end with David Moffat, it was a little bit of a fudge, So you had Cardiff Blues, which are really Cardiff, I suppose, which the people in the valleys don't like. You had Newport, which went in with Ebervale first of all, but then Ebervale had to drop out through financial issues. So you had the Newport Gwent Dragons. Well, was that supposed to be the Gwent side, or was it still Newport? It was a bit of a fudge, and nobody really quite knew, and it was neither fish nor fowl. And I think it did alienate a lot of people. You had the Celtic Warriors then, of course, which was Pontypridd and the Valleys and Bridgend. And they ran into financial trouble, so they were closed down. So you have an area there, the Valleys, which, geographically is in the Blues region, as they say, but culturally, it's quite a long way from the city slickers of Cardiff, So what we've got now is a bit of a hybrid, which it'll probably take another half a generation or even a generation for the regions, as they're called, to be truly loved, to be truly loved. And what you've definitely got to say, it has been to the detriment of the clubs, even though the clubs still exist in the Premiership, and Scrum 5 are covering a live Premiership game every Friday, which is great fun. But it's meant that those clubs have been downgraded, and whereas Neath would probably play in front of 6,000 or 7,000, packing out the Knoll, in a wonderful atmosphere, and Neath, at the time being the team of Britain, Pontypool packing out, Pontypool Park, being the finest team in the country for several seasons. They're now playing in front of a few hundred, and it's very much like the second tier of. So it has downgraded the clubs, and I think. One thing you will say about the regional game, though, is the fact you cannot argue that it's not been good for the national side, because since 2003 we've had we had 2 Grand Slams, we've had a championship winning team, we've had a Lions captain from Wales twice, unbeaten Lions captain. We've had the Wales coach has been the Lions coach, together with backroom staff. We sell out the Millennium Stadium generally for Six Nations games. The Welsh team is the money power driver of the game, so you can't argue that it's not been good for the top of the game, for the international game, but it has been to the detriment of the clubs, which is very sad. And I'm very much when I use Twitter, I try and speak up for club rugby and promote club rugby as much as I can. I use the hashtag Love Club Rugby, and I think we've got to find a way of keeping club rugby in the limelight, because without clubs, that's where a lot of the interest comes from, and that's where still most kids first pick up a ball is probably not in the schools, not in the primary schools like I did. I had a rugby teacher in school when I was in primary school in Cardiff, Mr. Ted Pierce, who was the first guy who put a ball in my hand, and lots of other kids in our school, and every school teacher seemed to have one. Now it's generally, they might have a Welsh Rugby Union club hub office that goes into the schools, but generally it's the clubs that first put a rugby ball into a kid's hands, certainly for them to play in an organised way. So anything that is to the detriment of clubs is to the detriment of the game. That's my opinion.
But then also, Phil, obviously rugby now, especially South Wales, has got competition from football, so it's probably more difficult, or a child has more of a choice which way they go. Obviously, football has that I can't think of the word, being more lucrative than rugby because of its the money you could possibly earn. But obviously it's going back to it, and what I would say to any kid, it's at the heart of it. It is our national sport, rugby. So it's okay.
That's a big. You could debate that one till the cows come home. What is the definition of a national sport? I would say that when the Welsh rugby team does well, it has a huge effect on the Welsh nation, and it's. I think it stirs the Welsh consciousness more than any other sport, more than I think even perhaps doing well in football, although the European Championships a couple of years ago was brilliant, even more so than I know we had Geraint Thomas winning the Tour de France, which was brilliant, or even if a Welsh athlete gets a gold medal at the Olympic Games, Nicole Cook, Geraint Thomas again, Jay Jones, they're all fantastic, but I don't think there's anything, if Wales rugby is doing well, winning a Six Nations. You know, they had, when Wales played France in the semi-final of the World Cup in New Zealand, they had 70,000 in the stadium watching on the big screen, you know. When Wales played Ireland in 2005 to win the Grand Slam, they had like 15,000 on the green outside the City Hall watching a screen. 100,000 people came into the city centre and didn't even go to the match. So I think there is that. The point you make about football is very poignant, and rugby has a problem in my estimation. Rugby has a problem with losing players, particularly male players, from the game at the age of 18. You know, and there's five sort of factors. And again, there's no empirical evidence that I've got for this. This is just going around so many rugby clubs, talking to people, and this is the message that I get. First of all, the first factor is that at 16, a lot of young players in clubs are swept up by the regional academies, you know, at 16 to 18, and they're taken away from their club. They're not allowed to play for their youth team. They can only play for the regional age group side. And of course, at 18 years of age, most of those players are not going to be good enough to make it as professionals. That's the very nature of it. And a lot of those players walk away from the game. They think rugby's done them a disservice, and they'll fall out of love with it. They haven't got a club to fall back on because they've been taken away from that club. So a lot of kids walk away from the game there. So that's one factor. Another factor is more children or more 18-year-olds go to university than went to university in my day. In the Glamorgan Wanderers youth team, I think I was only one of two people who went to higher education. Now it's probably half, probably out of 15, probably 10 would go to university, I would say. Another one is the fact of many more sports are on offer, like you just said there. You know, you can do swimming, badminton, triathlon. You know, none of these sports were available to me when I was a kid in the 70s. The other two then are Saturday jobs is another important one, and the other one that a lot of people don't think about is the physicality of the game. And a lot of kids, 16, 17, 18, they just don't want to play it because they don't want to get hurt. You know, rugby has become all the way down the levels virtually now a game for big, athletic, monstrous blokes, you know. And the days of the little guy on the wing or the tall beanpole guy in the second row or the fat guy playing prop are gone, really. You've got to have a degree of physicality now to play the game. And a lot of kids, I hear anecdotally, giving it up because of that, and getting parental pressure from parents, particularly mothers, to not play because of obviously the fear of getting hurt.
Would also, though you didn't mention, obviously the big one nowadays, brain injuries and concussion. Would that become under one of those as well?
That's a huge factor. I say again, it's particularly for parents. You know, I mean, I've got a daughter. If I was a dad with a 16-year-old boy now, just making that transition from sort of like under 16s to go to youth to play youth rugby, or going from youth rugby into senior rugby, would I be concerned if he was making that transition? I probably would be because the physicality of the game now, and not just the fact that people are so big, so huge, you know, they're real sort of muscle men these days. Not just that, but the way the game is. In my day, the game was all about, you know, slickness of hand and speed of pass and trying to evade collisions. Now, the game is really all about collision. You know, collision, and then let's see what's left. If we can, you know, can we find a bit of space for our backs when everyone else is knocked out? You know, that type of thing. So,
but then shouldn't the IRB step in and say, well, we know about these obviously head injuries, concussions becoming more of a problem because the players are more physical, are more athletics. Obviously, you being a PE teacher, you can relate to it. Obviously, speed and velocity, you have a bigger object hitting in one another, you're going to have a bigger impact. So shouldn't they, as a governing body now, think, well, let's change something and maybe go back to what in essence was the old style of the game? Anybody could play any position.
It's difficult to put the genie back into the bottle, James, but they are certainly legislating against the head injury now, aren't they? You know, that any contact with the head now, whether intended or not, is penalised by a penalty, often a red card. Anything to do with high tackles, they've moved the tackle area to the shoulder now, haven't they? I can see it going lower. I can see it eventually going perhaps even to the waistband. And players having a shirt with a yellow hoop around it. That's the level at which you've got to tackle or below. So I think World Rugby, in fairness to them, are on the case, particularly with regards to the head injuries part of it. It'll obviously take time to filter through. The Sam Warburton tackle against France in the World Cup in 2011, we were all aghast at it at the time. It was just, that should have only been a yellow card and what have you. Now, if that tackle happened, everyone would say straight red, goodbye. It's taken a little bit of time from the time the law comes in. There's a bit of a lag from when the law comes in or the directive comes into when it actually everybody gets wind of it and gets used to it. So I do think World Rugby are trying to address that side of it. What you can do about players getting bigger and stronger and faster, I don't know. Apart from have a weight limit, which they do in New Zealand, of course, at the junior level.
But then, obviously, you mentioned bringing the tackle height down significantly. Wouldn't the purist and the old school think rugby, and you've probably heard this a lot, becoming soft? And obviously, if you lower the tackle line again, even lower, would that argument still come up?
Well, I never really remember JPR Williams. I remember a famous shoulder charge by JPR Williams once on a French winger. That would have been outlawed now. But I never really remember JPR Williams tackling around the chest. JPR Williams was the finest tackler of a tackling player I've ever seen, and I don't remember him going high. So you're always taught to tackle low, round the legs, take their legs. They can't run without their legs. That was the mantra. So I wouldn't have thought. I don't think it would make the game any softer if you outlaw tackling from, say, above the waist. And I think it'd make the game a bit more enjoyable to watch because you'd be able to get the ball away quicker from the tackle, offloads and whatever out of the tackle. And that might force, that would certainly speed the game up. And then that might force players to become less big, but more aerobically and anaerobically fit,
Well, you could kind of see that in a little bit with the national team on the weekend against Tonga. Okay, they're playing. No disrespect to the Tongan national team, it's not South Africa, it's not Australia, it's not New Zealand. That kind of Harlem Globetrotter offload the Welsh team was doing, you think, I don't expect to see that when they play South Africa on the weekend, but you never know.
Hopefully, yeah. They did play some good stuff, particularly as the game broke up in the second half. One thing I think, going back to your point about what can World Rugby do? One of the things they might be able to do, obviously there would perhaps be a downside to this, but is to limit the amount of substitutions. Because at the moment we've got players who are fit for 20 minutes. The impact players, they call them, the finishers, as Eddie Jones likes to say. So they'll bring on a prop, a massive prop or a big second row, who just by the look at them, they wouldn't last the 80 minutes. But they're okay for the 20 minutes, and they're coming on against tired players, and that's going to have an impact. Pardon the pun. So I don't know if we went back to the days of just replacements for injuries. Maybe that would make things a bit better. Then you'd have to start with probably a team that could be more mobile for longer in a match. Would have to be mobile for the 80 minutes, and maybe that would bring sizes down and collisions down. There are various ways. The trouble is, whenever rugby's got enough laws and directives. If you read the rugby law book, it's you need to be a lawyer really to work it out. Somebody, and then you have the directives that come in every year from World Rugby and so on. And one of the things, whenever the law gets changed, there is always the law of unintended consequences. So a law can be. One of the classics was when they brought in, you couldn't kick directed touch from a ball pass back into the 22. And the idea was that teams wouldn't kick for touch so much and that perhaps they'd run it a bit more. And what happened, you had teams they knew they couldn't kick for touch, so they just kick it as long as they could. And then the old aerial tennis came in, and that was an unforeseen consequence of a law change that on the face of it looked positive. So law tinkering is and it seems that not a season goes by without some sort of new law or new directive coming in, is it?
Exactly. And my final question for you, Phil, before we wrap up the episode, is if you had to summarize what we've been speaking about today into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
I would say, well, we've talked about a lot of things, haven't we? That from law changes in rugby to mental illness to psychological techniques of a sportsman. I would just my one mantra is the one I used to try and tell the kids in school. And when I was a special needs teacher or when I was a PE teacher, I used to think if the kids went away from my lessons and they'd had fun, they'd enjoyed it, they would have learned something. They might not have learned what I intended them to learn, but they would have learned something. It would have been a positive. They would have taken something positive out of it. So I would, and the mantra I always use is a great former All Black called what was his name? Chris Laidlaw from the 1960s. He was the man that invented the spin pass. Came on tour with the All Blacks in 1967. He became a government minister in New Zealand afterwards. Chris Laidlaw, and he used to say about rugby training. He said, "If there's no fun in it, there's no future in it." And I think that's as applicable to rugby, to teaching, to athletics, to working in your office, to being a doctor in a hospital. If you can enjoy what you do and you can have fun and have a positive experience, you'll always get something with it. So try in whatever you do, try to enjoy it. Mind you, it's taken me 57 years to come around to that way of thinking, and I'm still working on it.
So once again, Phil, thanks again for coming on the Mindset Game podcast.
Great, James. Great to speak to you.
The pleasure's been all mine. If you like this episode, please do share it with your friends and do let Phil and I know what you thought of the episode by tagging us over on Instagram at PhilSteele1 and at JamesORoberts11 on Twitter and Facebook. And again, do check out Phil's book, Nerves of Steel. Make sure to check that out. The link will be in the description. You can find all the show notes at mindsetgame.lipsum.com under the category Sports. Once again, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time for another episode of the Mindset Game podcast.